Okay, so
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm sorry to have started a few minutes late, but we appreciate you being here in the first webinar for the Monitoring and Evaluation Interest Group for the Environmental Peacebuilding Association. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to start us off. And also joining me today is Juha Lido, who is the co-chair with me of the interest group.
Hello, I'm here.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. So just to give you guys an introduction on this webinar, in case you're not as familiar with the Environmental Peacebuilding Association, the association is a new multidisciplinary forum to help us address questions about the environment, conflict, and peace. There's going to be a lot of different pieces to the association, some really exciting stuff meant to generate knowledge development and exchange among its members, to build capacity and awareness about these issues, issues affecting the environment, conflict, and peace, and to strengthen relationships between scholars, practitioners, and decision makers so that we're all working together on the issues that matter most. The association has more than 160 members from 41 countries, which is pretty cool, and is serving as a knowledge platform, a community of practice. You can find the association on LinkedIn, Facebook, and other platforms. It will have webinars like this one, and members of the association are also working on developing mentorship and publication opportunities. As part of the association, there are a number of different interest groups that make it up, including the ones on water, law, and disasters. And there's also this interest group on monitoring and evaluation. Can you go to the next slide? So specifically about the M&E interest group, this group is aimed at enhancing learning and our capacity to assess and document the results from environmental peace building. We also want to document unintended consequences and the effects of the practice of environmental peace building and share that with others, as well as explore existing and developing approaches to monitoring and evaluation, as well as their limitations and what we can learn from one another to do better. So with that introduction, I'm going to pass it over to Juha, who will get us started on monitoring and evaluation.
Okay, can we get to the next slide then, please? So what is this whole thing about monitoring and evaluation? Now, why do we care about it? So, I mean, the simple answer, and Amanda already touched upon it earlier with regard to why we have this interest group, is that monitoring and evaluation is quite essential if we really need to know, we want to know whether we are reaching the objectives of these interventions that we are talking about. These interventions can, of course, be policies, strategies, programs, or projects. And of course, on the ground, everything is happening very quickly. But we still need to track and see what is happening and are we going where we want to go. In conflict situations, as others also, but in particular, I think conflict situations, we are very concerned about whether all parties and all people who are part of the equation are actually benefiting from the interventions. Amanda mentioned already the unintended or unanticipated consequences, which can be both positive and negative, but we really need to know them. We have to be concerned about the sustainability, whether it's at the political, social, economic, or environmental level. And unfortunately, it appears to me that in many contexts, the environmental aspects are being forgotten or coming as an afterthought. And as we know that the environment can either be a cause for conflict in many cases, access to natural resources and so forth, but it can also be something that we rally around to avoid conflict and so forth. Of course, then the ultimate goal of the monitoring and evaluation thing is to, what could we do better? What are the lessons that we can learn? Where did we go wrong? What could have gone better? So next slide. The M&E is a pair of words that rolls off the tongue very easily, and we're kind of used to talking about M&E, about monitoring and evaluation, as some sort of a pair. And of course they are related functions, but they are also different functions. And actually, it's kind of funny that in this the title of this webinar we are conflating everything from assessing impact to monitoring and evaluation. But strictly speaking, and as an evaluation professional, I like to make these distinctions quite clear. So monitoring is fundamentally a management tool. It's checking that we are doing what we set out to do. It takes the internal logic of an intervention as given, and checks whether we are on schedule, we are reaching the targets, and so on. So one of the ways of putting this is that the question is, are we doing things right? Evaluation, on the other hand, is a much more fundamental function that can actually question, are we doing the right things? Did we design the project or program or strategy correctly? Did we actually think this through, and are we doing the things that we should be doing? Evaluation is also a much more an analytical function, in the sense that it helps us to understand what happens on the ground to the people, to the different groups of people, and to the environment, the natural resources, and we also have to know why things happen as they do. If we want to learn, we need to know these things. So next slide, please. There are particular challenges of evaluating in conflict and post-conflict situations that do not they are obviously the same challenges as in many other evaluations, but may be exacerbated by these conflict situations. Obviously, we are in complex situations. We have multiple actors, and we have multiple and often conflicting narratives about what has happened and how things got to where they are now. There is an issue of non-linearity of change. Things are moving very fast often, but and things don't go necessarily according to the neat plans that we had set out. Then the stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders, and who owns evaluation? Is it the government? We go into a situation where government is in control. Is it them who we should listen to primarily, or is it the winning parties? There was always if there was a conflict, so there is a risk conflict has been overcome, or so there is a risk that then we take it for granted that the good guys won, and we adhere to their principles. At the same time, maybe we are sowing the seeds of the next conflict, or we are not addressing if there are grievances by one side. So questions such as, are interventions benefiting all parties, and so forth, that we have to ask in evaluation. Then there are technical questions such as institutional capacity for evaluation. If we don't come from the outside and just impose an evaluation system, but we are actually dealing with national capacities, but these may have actually been destroyed in a conflict situation. Benchmarks and baselines in general are often challenged. What are we evaluating against? How do we recognize success actually? It's not just that we have done what we set out to do, but we want to end up in a better place at the end. And of course, then the whole issue of what is happening to the natural resources and the environment, which, as I said earlier, might have been actually the root cause, or at least a contributing cause to the conflict in the first place. So overall, what we think that there are limits to the traditional experimental and quasi-experimental designs, and often in these kinds of evaluations, we need qualitative approaches which are more feasible than quantitative approaches, and that are more able to capture the perspectives of the stakeholders at different levels. So I think that often we are advocating for theory-based approaches that help us understand how planned interventions would lead to the desired social and developmental changes, and what are the assumptions and risks that would be involved in each of the steps along the way. But of course, then again, one of the fundamental challenges is that many of the programs and projects that we are dealing with, in particularly in conflict and post-conflict situations, because things are so moving so fast and they are so urgent, they have been initiated without a clear theory of change. We don't necessarily know when we start an intervention of we think that we're doing lots of good things, and we're thinking that this will be useful and necessary to do, but we haven't thought through necessarily what are our assumptions, what are the risks associated with it, and how do things then actually lead to the better outcomes for all people, the natural resources, and the environment. And I'll hand back over to Amanda.
Great, thank you, Juha. And if we can go to the next slide. One thing that I wanted to mention that has been the subject of some of my professional and educational studies has been conflict sensitivity, which is essentially the degree to which a process, a project, a program is sensitive to, aware of, responsive to the conflict context in which that process, project, or program is taking place. So one thing that we've found is that monitoring and evaluation, the processes that you had described a bit earlier, should explore any intervention degree of and process for conflict sensitivity. So not just looking at, did that intervention achieve its primary goals, but how has that intervention been sensitive to the conflict and its activities and processes? How has it built in conflict sensitivity, and what does that look like, and how is it working? In addition, at a different level, we need to make sure that monitoring and evaluation itself, those processes, are undertaken in a conflict sensitive manner. So when we're doing monitoring, when we're doing an evaluation, are we considering how doing that, in addition to the intervention's main activities or processes, is affecting the conflict? Are we including the people that we need to include in those processes? Are we looking at the right things? Are we doing monitoring, and are we doing our evaluations in a way that is sensitive to the conflict context? So that's something important, but that isn't necessarily well understood or as thought through, or that we don't have as much evidence about as some of the other areas. And then lastly, if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. I just wanted to mention a couple of examples of evaluation, mostly of environmental peace building activities or projects or processes that I know of. And after this, we're going to open it up if we want to hear more from those attending this webinar, what your experiences are and what questions you have. The first one is the one I know best, having worked with Conservation International in the development of its environmental peace building manual. And this manual, which is available to anyone on their website, is a process for how to go about doing environmental peace building and doing conservation in a conflict-sensitive manner. Conservation International was also very keen to include a process for monitoring and evaluation in environmental peace building. So what does it look like to monitor and evaluate an environmental peace building process, and how can we do that in a conflict-sensitive way? What that includes is looking for, as Juha mentioned, is an important part of monitoring and evaluation, looking for unintended consequences, unintended outcomes. The other thing that Conservation International has emphasized in its manual is to be as participatory as possible, both in any environmental peace building project, but also in monitoring and evaluation, getting the necessary stakeholders involved in whatever way works best for the situation. The manual also discusses the identification of, for monitoring, the identification of primary and secondary monitoring indicators. So primary indicators being those that are sort of the intended outcomes of an environmental peace building or conservation project, and the secondary indicators being indicators that would give you a better picture of the conflict context of the issues, complex issues that you're trying to address. The second example I wanted to mention is the evaluation process for the Good Water Neighbors Project, which was started by EcoPeace and Friends of the Earth Middle East in 2001. This project was aimed at raising awareness for water issues in Palestine, Jordan, and Israel through common cooperation on environmental water-related issues. As part of this project, they evaluated how staff for the project and youth who participated in the project perceived the project, and using a questionnaire evaluated both people's changes in understanding of environmental issues and changes in the political and natural environment. What they found was that there was definitely an increased understanding of environmental issues among the participants, but that the issue of whether or not the natural environment or the political situation changed was less secure in their findings. And they also mentioned in their evaluation, which Juha alluded to earlier, was that sometimes we don't know what the impacts will be because it requires a long timeline for studying that impact. And so they conducted their evaluation at the end of the project, and it remained to be seen what would happen years on. And the final evaluation that I want to mention is the UN Environmental Programme's evaluation of its Environmental Cooperation for Peacebuilding program, which was launched in 2008 to provide expertise and methods to UN bodies, member states, nonprofits, and others to advance opportunities for peace that are afforded by natural resource stewardship. So the UNEP and this particular program conducted an evaluation of its projects at various phases and found that they were highly relevant, which I think most people on this webinar would agree that it's important. Environmental peace building is an important opportunity. And they saw it as an important step towards generating a knowledge base about environmental peace building. But the evaluation pointed to certain questions about the evaluation or the environmental cooperation for peace building programs, how it works with other UN programs. They said that perhaps it was a bit isolated, which I think some of us with experience with environmental peace building have seen that. And also noted that the sustainability of the program depends on the will of people to participate in the program, to enact some of the program's activities and processes. So if we could go to the next slide. Before we open it up to the group, I realized that I failed to introduce myself and Juha at the beginning of the webinar. I was very excited and just dove right in. So I wanted to go ahead and introduce us and then see if participants would, in your chat window, introduce yourselves there. And then we will open it up for any questions. We can go through the discussion list, but I wanted to start. If Juha, if you could introduce yourself.
Me, right? Yes. So I'm Juha Uitto, and I have the pleasure and honor of co-chairing this interest group on monitoring and evaluation. And my day job is with the Global Environment Facility Independent Evaluation Office, which I direct since 2014, actually, and I've been doing environmental and development evaluation for about full-time, more or less, for 20 years now.
Great, thank you. And I'm Amanda Wimmer. I currently work on a project doing disaster recovery efforts in the U.S. Previously, I worked with Conservation International to develop the Environmental Peace Building Training Manual as part of my dissertation research, which focused on conflict-sensitive conservation. So that would be me. I'm having some trouble seeing people's introductions in the chat window, but I'm sure I'll be able to see that shortly. I wanted to open it up if people can raise their hands, so to speak. If you have any questions or suggestions, particularly related to, as the slide says, what the interest group should focus on. We're looking as a new interest group to the future as to what kinds of activities or events or issues we should be focused on. What interesting questions that you all have where we think we need more knowledge about the monitoring and evaluation of environmental peace building efforts. Again, what events or activities you'd like to see, and if you have any suggestions to the group about who's doing innovative work in this area and resources that we should check out.
Right, and maybe so just to clarify the fact that you can either use your function where you can wave your hand and we have Nina Hamilton somewhere in the DC area who will give you the microphone. Otherwise, if you just prefer, you can just type your comments into the chat room. So we can, either way, we can deal with this thing. And it's actually, I think that it's quite. This is our first public appearance as the Monitoring and Evaluation Interest Group, and the society association itself is relatively new. So I'm personally glad that monitoring and evaluation doesn't come as an afterthought, as in many cases it does, because when we build these things into programs and projects and systems and strategies, so then we think about how to monitor and evaluate, and how to measure our own success and how to learn for the future. It has to come from the has to be upfront.
Okay, we did have one question, and then I think we can open up the microphone to some hands that were raised. Someone asked if we could share an example of a good water neighbors project. When I mentioned that, I was referring to a specific project that was established by EcoPeace and Friends of the Earth Middle East. And in that project, they worked in a number of communities with people from Israel, Palestine, and Jordan to educate them on water issues and to develop projects based on water issues. That, if you're interested in learning more about it, if you Google EcoPeace and Good Water Neighbors Project, you should be able to find that information pretty easily.
Good. And I see that we have a few hands up here, so shall we hand the microphone to Eric Abitbol first? Are you able to do that? Or was there somebody else?
Oh, can you hear me there? Great. Well, thanks very much, Amanda and Juha, for organizing this and for organizing the interest group. And there's certainly a lot to say and a lot to think about. You've introduced the topic for us. It's not so much a question. I think there are just a couple of things that I suppose I just wanted to re-emphasize about what you said that I found particularly interesting around the conflict. A few things, the conflict sensitivity of M&E practice itself, I think, is really key, given that M&E is itself an intervention, and we often don't, I think, consider ourselves in a reflexive fashion about what we're doing and the implications of that for the different actors on the ground. And it's something that's come up for a long time now already, and it's just a matter of remembering and re-emphasizing the importance of that, and you do in speaking about the conflict sensitivity of M&E and the need to do that. The other thing that I wanted to raise was the issue around the timeline and complexity and who benefits from interventions, but also from M&E interventions, and also who benefits when in the process of these timelines that we're assessing. So the work itself, but also the focus and the design of any intervention, and again, what are we speaking to, and there's this kind of dual thing that you guys have pointed out, which is the monitoring and evaluation of the interventions themselves on the one hand, and then the M&E as an intervention. So who benefits and when? And I think there's a certain asymmetry there in the benefits through time, both of the interventions and of the M&E systems, in the way in which they're and practices in the way in which they're posited. And I guess the last thing was around the who owns the evaluation, and I think that's a really powerful and important question. Because I've been involved in an initiative at one point, and this is going back some years ago, where some of the actors involved appreciated the analysis, and others found it to be too political and didn't want it to be publicly shared. And I think and again, this just goes back to the original point that I was making, that the M&E practices are themselves interventions, and they play into the political economy within contexts, and it's important to negotiate and navigate that minefield. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, and I think that it is something that we often forget, is that we also need to think about how we're doing the M&E as an intervention, as you said. We had another hand raised by Miguel Londono. If we can give him the mic, and Miguel, if you can make sure to unmute yourself in case you had done that.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Senior Officer for Post-Conflict and Green Growth at the Global Green Growth Institute, stationed in Bogota, Colombia. I'm currently doing advisory work for the Colombian government on productive project issues and other related issues to the implementation of the peace accords with FARC. One of the things that strikes me when I hear the webinar is the Colombian government and FARC have agreed a set of 501 indicators, out of which around 20% are environmentally related. However, thing is, they measure mostly activities and not the impact. And beyond that, most of the indicators do not have clear goals. So I wonder how can we, out of this working group, enhance that process? Just an idea. One of the things I know is that the Kroc Institute at Notre Dame University is also conducting a parallel monitoring of the implementation of the peace accords here in Colombia. So I guess I just wanted to throw it out and see what you guys think.
Thanks very much. I think that's one of these issues. You can set up so many indicators and try to measure them, but what do they actually then tell you about the processes and your impact you are having? That's always a very different question, I think, and that's why I would tend to advocate for much more sort of like mixed methods, qualitative approaches to these kinds of situations, because we really have to understand the situations. And like Eric said earlier, the monitoring and evaluation itself is already an intervention, and we have to be very careful about how we position ourselves in a situation like this.
Okay, thanks, Juha and Miguel. I wanted to address an earlier question that we had about sharing the slides as well as some of the references and examples that we provided. And the association will make the slides available, and I'll make sure that that version that's posted will have links to some resources for the examples that we mentioned. We also had a question from Matt Whiteman with Chaco for Peace in Colombia, and he asked, do you know anybody who offers M&E services pro bono to social or environmental startups? Alternately, I would love to connect with graduate students looking for research projects in this space. Juha, do you have any suggestions about M&E services or graduate students? I know that this is would be a great project, and I know there are always graduate students looking for projects and listservs where you could post that. But do you have any other suggestions, Juha?
I don't know if I have any at least sort of like a pro bono professional evaluation services. I wish there were, but people tend to be quite a lot of for profit in this area, unless you are actually an institutional evaluator. But maybe we could pass this back to, for example, Eric, because I know that at the American University you do have graduate programs that can deal with these kind of issues, and I'm sure that in many other universities as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just to say a word on that. What we've done there is we train American University students in environmental peace building assessment as part of a graduate seminar, and it's interesting. It takes us to the Israeli-Palestinian context and assessing the environmental peace building significance of Israeli-Palestinian water, food, energy nexus cooperation. So the resource itself of the graduate students undertaking that study is free, if you will, free of charge to the organizations in the field, although of course the students are paying for the courses and the university is paying for the professors and everything else. So there's an economy around that, but the resource of the students doing that work and the reports that are written are available. And I mean, so American University is doing this. I'm supporting the students. Ken Conka is supporting the students. I imagine that it may very well be taking place at other universities around the world in different ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, and I think that just looking at what schools offer programs on, the school that I attended for my PhD work has an international conflict management program, so it's not necessarily environmentally focused, but they do teach about monitoring and evaluation, and there is a way to focus on conservation-related issues, as I did. We had another question from Sabrina Welter, who asked if we could point at key topics that need further research. From my end, I think we need a lot of general research on what best practices for conflict-sensitive monitoring and evaluation look like, especially the actual practice of doing so. As Juha and Eric have both mentioned, doing M&E is an intervention in itself, and I think there's often a lot of information out there about the results from an evaluation, but not as much sharing of experiences as to how an organization or a project worked on monitoring specifically. There's just generally not a lot of information on monitoring processes, but the process of doing the monitoring and conducting an evaluation and what works best. From my end, that's something I'm very interested in. And Juha, did you want to add anything in particular about key topics that need further research?
Well, one of the things that we had thought, and I guess we are really coming to this these questions that we have on screen on what are the interesting questions and where we need more knowledge, and what are the what kind of activities, for example, the participants in this group would like to see us undertake. And one of the ideas that we do have is to actually do a literature search, both of academic literature, but also of kind of a gray literature, if you wish, research projects and projects that different kinds of organizations have done in this area and documented, and do a review article basically on what the state is, and I believe personally that maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't seen anything like that really done in a systematic manner, where you could actually really take stock of what the state of the art is actually. Do you think that that's a valid idea?
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that we're looking to discuss here, is to hear other people's ideas about topics that may be important both for research and for the interest group to address. You know, already we've had some people mention in the chat window about resources for graduate students and others looking to help in the environmental peace building space. And this is also an area that the association and this interest group could get active in, if that's something that other people are interested in, for this interest group and for the association more generally.
Yeah, and I think this is actually a fairly broad idea, concept, and the whole association is pretty broad. And I remember I had several months ago I had a discussion with Carl Brook, who is the chair of this whole association, and we talked a little bit about this notion of environmental peace building, and I think that Carl, and I think you are there actually somewhere lurking, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, it's intentionally kept broad. So we are not only talking about post-conflict situations, but we are talking about also natural resources and environment as factors in promoting cooperation and so forth. So it's a broad concept. So I'm not sure whether even one review would be adequate, or should we have more targeted reviews of the literature, for example? I don't know.
And even if you don't have any ideas or questions today, we would encourage people that are attending this webinar now and are interested in the interest group to visit the Environmental Peacebuilding Association's website and join the interest group. This webinar is open to everyone, but we envision in the future that we'll have certain webinars and other activities that are open only to the interest group members. So if you guys want to check that out, and there will also be more information on this webinar and the slides, the website for the association is www.environmentalpeacebuilding.org. And I think we have one or two more people that have raised their hands. If we can open the mic up to Serge. Serge, if you make sure your mic is unmuted.
Oh, thanks so much. Good morning. Good morning, Johan. I think you get me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, great. So I'm Serge Yaku. I think we do met many times. Maybe the last time we met was last year in Mexico. So I'm working as international evaluation expert, and then listening to you guys. This association soon very great. I think further step up to be built on. Like I didn't, I work a lot in peace building context, mostly in Africa. Either on the peace building project with Care International in DRC, or with WFP, with many thematic area like in Mali or in Chad. But as somebody already said from Latin America, I think the association also have to think about what might be your interest groups, and then the task force for the associations, because it didn't seem to appear into the presentations, kind of how the association is going to tackle all those talents, but who they are going to work with, how the association is going to be organized, and I was most important to see if those more, let's say, much detail, but I do believe that the group can also work to figure out those missing, or maybe those plans, and then also the scope of the association also. I don't know if you are going to just make it global, so as to cover, the peace intervention environment is worldwide spread, mostly in the south, and then there are many challenges ongoing, and those challenges are increasing from here to the next one. So, and I think there are so many things to do with. So just to say, to look at you guys to see whether and how we are prepared. You are going to prepare to tackle all those challenges. How you going to do? How the scope of the association will look like? How we are going to organize, to get maybe various task force to work to social objectives. So these were one of my interests.
Good. Constructive. Just one thing you said. There's always this tendency that we tend to look into things that are happening in the south, so to say, and we know that there's a lot of stuff going on in the north and in our countries where we live, and United States not the least. And for example, so Amanda's current work is focusing on the United States. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and I think this interest group, I just wanted to add that I think this interest group and the association more generally, but just to speak for this interest group, we are really at this point just getting started and interested in identifying a variety of different opportunities for the association members, for the interest group members to work together on the issues that are important to us, to work together to figure out how we can identify best practices, how we can identify processes for monitoring and evaluation that work. So I'm happy to hear that there are people with a variety of experiences on this webinar who I hope will be interested in joining the interest group and working with us.
We have, by the way, a typed chat post from Andy Rowing, Canada, who is highlighting that resources are often at the heart of conflict, such as water, and that this is an added attribute for a resource, and he's curious how we would accord this resource special attention to the evaluation beyond what we would normally do for any important resource. And then he's pointing out that the conceptually the human conflict and natural system couple at all key resources. How do we recognize this at the evaluation? And that's an excellent question, and it's a huge question, and we do have to work on that. Evaluators mostly tend to come from the perspective of the human system. And when we are talking about environmental peace building, and we're talking about conflicts, either existing or avoiding conflicts around natural resources and actually disaster situations, we would really ignore the environmental dimension at our own peril, and that I personally think that that's a major weakness in current evaluation approaches, that we really, you talk about sustainable development resting on environment, or social and economic and environmental pillars, and then somehow the environment gets short shrift. And often I think that that would require to be able to address these things. So we would need to have some environmental expertise built into the evaluations. We need to have people who understand actually the dynamics of the natural systems and how they pose limitations, or how they are affected and how they affect human activities. So if we lack that expertise in evaluation, we are missing a lot of important aspects of what we are trying to understand.
I completely agree with you, Jose, that we need to focus on a little bit more. Earlier, you had mentioned something about mixed methods evaluations, but also multidisciplinary evaluations and monitoring data. You can't just look at one aspect or another and expect to really do a good job and really get the complete picture. Okay, we're almost nearly out of time. We have one more person that raised their hand. I'm sorry if I get your name wrong, but or maybe we have two more. Fakunli, if we could unmute your microphone and make sure that you are off of mute.
Unmute yourself if you are trying to speak.
Okay, I may have pronounced the name wrong, so that might be my fault. But in the meantime, if we can go back to Eric, I know you had another question.
Okay, great, thanks. Just a very quick question. If the other person is unmuted and wants to jump in, that's fine too. It was a question about utilization-focused evaluation, and I think and I just want to put it on the table because I think one of the big challenges around what we do, and particularly in the qualitative tradition, is this utilization-focused evaluation. And the implications of that for participatory approaches. But in terms of defining, who is going to use these evaluations that we conduct and how are they going to be used, and and then designing the evaluations as a consequence. So I kind of put it out there because I think it's a real challenge. What are the implications of that for the way in which evaluations are designed, for the accountability mechanism of those who are designing and conducting the evaluations? To whom are we accountable? Are we accountable to the donors, to the organizations that are involved in some of these interventions, to the communities that are engaged in the evaluations, in the initiatives on the ground that are being evaluated? And just to give an example, a colleague of mine once conducted an evaluation, did some work in Somalia, and how to ensure that the findings and the work that's done actually find its way back to the communities in a language that's understood, through a medium that is understood, and ensuring that, again, the utilization dimension of the evaluations is appropriate to the contexts, and again, so that we're clear about to whom are we accountable and how does that accountability play itself out, and that the resources and the time, that the mandates themselves are all taken into account and negotiated. So I'm sure people have all kinds of experience and insights around how they've done this, and I would certainly appreciate today or another time learning about that. Thank you.
Thanks. And that obviously is also at the heart of your earlier point about that of evaluation as an intervention, and how are we as evaluators being perceived in the situation, and who do we represent, and so on. But I had one more point, which is this thing that I was saying earlier about a couple of times about mixed methods and qualitative approaches and so on, and the limitations of randomized control trials and all of that stuff. But that doesn't mean that I would be excluding necessarily quantitative measures. And especially when it comes to the environmental side of things, you actually have methods that will help you to quantify what has happened on the ground to the environment and natural resources. And for example, here at the Global Environment Facility, we have been increasingly using things like remote sensing data, geospatial methods, geographical information systems, or science as they call it now, which allow you to actually map and actually quantify what has happened to the resources. So when you have that type of quote unquote scientific basis for demonstrating what actually happened, it also can be very useful and lead to less contested situations in that sense.
Okay, great. So we're nearly out of time. I wanted to, on behalf of Johan, myself, and the Environmental Peacebuilding Association, thank all of you for attending this webinar today. We plan to make the slides available Not exactly sure how that will work right now, but you should get an email with some instructions as to where you can find them. And again, I'll make sure to add some resources and examples, so links to those onto the slides. And I just want to end also with an encouragement to anyone who's interested to please join the association and this interest group and get in touch with Juha and myself about ideas that you have as we ramp up our activities. I'm really looking forward to the next couple of months, the next year with the association. So thank you all so much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar or event.
Yeah, and let me just echo Amanda on this and emphasize that this is the initial discussion. This is just the beginning. So we very much look forward to interacting with all of you in the future and getting this thing going and doing something concrete and nice. And I understand that there's going to be actually an opportunity for face-to-face meeting in California in October in coming year and so on. So you'll be, especially if you join the association, you'll be kept posted on that.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.